The assault on Pointe Du Hoc. Here's the hook. Most people know the outline, the Army Rangers, the cliffs, the flamethrowers, the heroism. But the story of Pointe Du Hoc that has been etched into the American memory is often a simplified, sanitized version. A straightforward tale of daring do, where the good guys scale a wall and save the day. The reality, the one that serious students of warfare need to sit with, is far more uncomfortable. It is a story less about a successful assault and more about a 48-hour emergency, a mission that was effectively broken before the first ranger hooked his grapple. The strategic rationale that sent 225 men up those ropes was, to put it bluntly, flawed. But what happened after the plan fell apart? That is where the real lesson in leadership, small unit tactics, and pure survival resides. The valor is undeniable, but the context reveals a truth that gets lost in the memorial speeches. The Rangers weren't just fighting the Germans, they were fighting the chaos of a failed plan, and they won anyway. The raid was born from a simple critical fear: the guns. The German coastal artillery battery at Pointe Du Hoc consisted of 6 captured French 155mm guns, capable of raining shells down on both Utah and Omaha beaches. If those guns remained operational, the landings could be annihilated. Aerial bombardment had done its best, but the casemates were thick. The job fell to the 2nd Ranger Battalion under the command of Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder. The plan was audacious to the point of madness. Land at the base of 100-foot cliffs, fire rocket-propelled grapples with climbing ropes, and ascend under direct enemy fire. The plan relied on speed and surprise. But, from the moment the landing craft approached the coast, surprise was lost. Navigation errors, combined with the loss of several landing craft to the choppy channel, delayed the assault by 40 minutes. That 40 minutes allowed the German garrison, already alerted by the pre-invasion bombardment, to settle into their positions along the cliff edge. When the Rangers hit the beach, they weren't climbing an empty wall, they were climbing into a prepared kill zone. German machine gunners and grenadiers could lean over the edge and drop explosives directly onto the men below. The rope systems, waterlogged by the rough seas, failed to reach the top. The Rangers weren't supposed to free climb a cliff under fire, but that is exactly what they did, digging their fingers into the chalk and mud. And then, the first and most jarring discovery was made. When the lead elements of the 2nd Battalion crested the lunar-like crater field at the top, they found empty gun pits. The massive artillery pieces were gone. The Germans had removed them, replacing them with telephone poles to fool reconnaissance aircraft. The entire mission, the primary objective for which men had already died, was based on an intelligence picture that had expired. This is a moment often glossed over in popular retellings. But it is the crux of the matter for any historian. The raid had achieved its tactical objective, the real estate, but it had failed its strategic purpose. The guns were somewhere else, still a threat. Rudder's Rangers, now, a disorganized group of small teams scattered across the fortified position, had to adapt or fail. The adaptation that followed is a masterclass in small unit initiative. Instead of digging in to wait for relief, small patrols of Rangers, operating on their own gut instinct, pushed inland. Sergeant Leonard Lommel and Sergeant Jack Kuhn, moving through the hedgerows, spotted a track of disturbed grass. Following it about a kilometer south of the coast road, they stumbled into an apple orchard. There, camouflaged and ready to fire, were the 6 missing 155mm guns, stockpiled with ammunition, pointed directly at Utah Beach. Without a moment's hesitation, the 2 men acted. They had no heavy weapons, so they used what they had: thermite grenades. They smashed the sights and jammed the mechanisms, destroying the guns where they stood. This was not a planned phase of the operation, it was the Ranger ethos, the Rangers lead-the-way mentality, executed by men who understood that the plan was dead and survival meant thinking for themselves. But destroying the guns was only the beginning of the ordeal. The Rangers now held a worthless crater field and a stretch of the coastal highway, but they were isolated. The relief force, the 5th Ranger Battalion, had been diverted to Omaha Beach when the signal from a Pointe Du Hoc to bind the 2 materialize. Rudder and his men were on their own. For the next 2 days, they endured something that is rarely captured in the cinema: a desperate, low-ammunition defensive fight against a German force that was determined to push them back into the sea. This phase of the battle offers more to the survivalist-minded viewer than the climb ever could. The Rangers were not holding a line, they were holding a series of shell craters. They used the moonscape to their advantage, turning bomb craters into individual fighting positions. They were cold, wet, and running out of .30 caliber rounds. Communications were sporadic at best. Wounded men lay in the mud, and the medical supplies were gone. When the German counterattacks came, they came in waves, probing for weak spots in the American perimeter. The Rangers survived because of what modern military doctrine calls small unit cohesion. They knew the man next to them. They didn't fight for a flag or a general. They fought because the alternative was letting the other guy down. By the time the relief force from the 29th Infantry Division finally broke through on June 8th, the 2nd Ranger Battalion had been reduced from 225 men to roughly 90 who could still bear arms. The aftermath of Pointe Du Hoc is where we find the political and historical friction. In recent years, historian Gary Stern's discovery and excavation of the Mazy Battery has complicated the narrative significantly. Mazy was a massive multi-battery complex a few miles away that was still operational days after the invasion. Stern argues, based on declassified orders, that Rudder's primary job was not just to take Pointe Du Hoc, but to push inland and neutralize Mazy and Grand Camp. Rudder never made it. He held his position at the highway. This has sparked a debate. Did Rudder disobey orders? Or did he make the right call to hold what he had with a shattered battalion? For the viewer, the lesson is not about judging a man decades later. The lesson is about the fog of war. In the moment, with your radios dead and your men dying, the grand strategic plan drawn up by a general in England becomes irrelevant. Rudder made a decision based on the ground truth in front of him. Whether it was the correct decision according to the paperwork is a question for archives. Whether it was the right decision for the survival of his command is a question for the battlefield. The assault on Pointe Du Hoc matters because it exposes the lie in the phrase "mission accomplished." It reminds us that warfare is not a checklist. It is a chaotic, fluid mess where the enemy gets a vote and intelligence is always late. The Rangers succeeded not because the plan was perfect, but because they were resilient enough to survive the plan's collapse. They climbed the wrong cliff, they found the wrong guns, and they held a position that should have been reinforced in hours for days. For the student of history, the real value isn't in the heroics, it is in the adaptation. It is in watching a unit absorb a catastrophic failure of intelligence and still find a way to win. That is the lesson that transcends the beaches of Normandy. That is the lesson of Pointe Du Hoc. If you value this kind of deep dive, no-nonsense historical analysis, the kind that looks past the myth and into the mud, make sure you subscribe to War Machiner. Hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to understand what war actually demands from the men who fight it.